Well, Stephen, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the invitation. It's a beautiful day outside. Good day to talk about exercise and health, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. To start, I know you're keen on having a common mental model for endurance. We're talking about endurance. So to start, can we just define training zones and if that would be the best vernacular or best framework to talk about endurance?
Yeah, there's all these different systems, but the one that I think works really well for just average folks, including myself, is a three system model. And you can almost think of it as three lights: green, yellow, red. The green zone is where we should actually spend most of our time in that exercise scenario of, endurance. And the green zone is that intensity where you can stay there a long time if you're reasonably fit. You can talk to someone beside you if you're cycling or jogging along a path. Uh, your heart rate, if you have a heart rate monitor, it stays flat during that hour or 90 minutes of activity you're doing. It doesn't keep climbing up and up and up. And when you're finished with that workout, you're pretty much ready to go eat dinner. You're immediately, you have an appetite. You're empty. You don't feel exhausted and poisoned. For those of us who have done interval sessions. So that's that first zone, green zone, and that's where elite athletes spend most of their time. Okay, not in the yellow and red. The yellow zone is often called threshold. And it's a region where now the intensity is higher. Your brain has to focus more on what it's doing. You can't really be smelling the roses. You have to be more tuned in to your own body. And we often say we start scanning our body, but it's a place where you can stay intensity wise for at least 30 minutes. And for reasonably well trained, it may be 2 hours you can be there with a lot of effort. That's that threshold area. Blood lactate's higher, you're breathing harder, you probably don't want to talk as much, but it's still in an area you can stay reasonably long time. And then there's the red zone. And once you go there, you're talking minutes instead of hours. You're talking, every second or at least every minute you're counting because it's hard. And that's typical high intensity interval training, hill repeats, these kinds of things we do. The lactate's high, you're breathing out your ears, and so unfortunately we often think that that's the only way to train, but that should be the icing on the cake. But that's that red zone. So those three zones, if you get the distribution right and understand those, then you solve a lot of problems.
Okay, well, I'm pleased. I'm pleased you mentioned cake. I doing the research. I came across a lovely Norwegian phrase that I heard you talk
Right.
about, which is you're either making cake or you're either eating cake. When it comes to building endurance, can you talk about how that cake
Yeah.
takes
Yeah,
sense?
well, making cake is that green zone work, or it's primarily just doing the work. Uh, Good athletes are consistent. They get out the door pretty much every day and they do the work, but they don't work to exhaustion every day. They can't. And so making the cake is about building adaptations, it's about consistency and so forth. Eating the cake is that when you have that base, that basic fitness, then your body is able to handle those tougher workouts. And then you get a synergistic effect between the two. But if you try to do the one without the other, if you try to eat the cake that you haven't made, well, then you pretty quickly go into a deficit, if that makes sense.
It
You're
does.
drawing on resources you don't really have. And so that's the symbiosis of doing the work, that green zone training, just getting out there, enjoying the flowers and the birds chirping as you're going along, and then that really tough focused work. There has to be they're synergistic.
What's interesting, I think, with where a lot of more people are becoming athletes, right? In the other day, most people have smart devices and are much more interested in sort of high performance from a physical point of view. Where I think loads of people, including myself, maybe aren't as educated is, well, in my own expertise, my own personal story is every time I'm trying to build endurance for the last decade, whether it be for 800-meter running or 400-meter running or all sorts of different sports, it would be intensity over training volume, right? Because if it doesn't hurt, it's not gonna change, right? And this whole model, and I really struggle to break it still. I
Mm.
struggle to go on a real slow zone two equivalent green zone
Mm.
run. Can we talk about how important it is building an aerobic base versus a VO2 max and some of the better methods to do this?
Well, your examples are a little bit special. The 400 meter is really anaerobic. I was a 400 meter person myself, and back in school and so forth, and so I didn't do a lot of 10-kilometer runs then either. But as soon as you get to something like 4 minutes of competition time or activity time, then we're talking endurance. We're talking you have to build those mitochondria, those capillaries, and so you could say that the basic physiology of going for 4 minutes or 4 hours is the same. And that's what people don't understand. And so you've got to do that patient, kind of low intensity volume. Elite athletes, we don't see any shortcuts. If they don't do the volume, regular, then they don't get the adaptations. They don't achieve what they want to achieve. Now you say, well, I'm not ever going to train 20 hours a week. No, you're not. But the basic conceptualization, the distribution is surprisingly the same. So if you're training 4 days a week and you're training on average an hour a day, but maybe you're able to do a longer effort once a week, you still need to think about that. If all 4 of those days are go out and just kill it, you will stagnate really quickly. That's just what we see. The most common mistake that age group athletes, recreational athletes, regular folks, the most common mistake they make is they train too hard. I don't know how to say it differently because I've been one of them. I've been there. I've made every mistake you can make. But when these people come back to me after 8 weeks and say, you know what? I tried this thing where I actually slow down a bit and then my hard workouts, man, everything's just going better. I'm enjoying training and my 10K time is the best it's been in 10 years. It works, but you got to trust it enough to let your genetics and your physiology actually, take control.
Okay, so if we use running as an example, to run fast, I mean, over, we're not talking 400 meters, we're talking over that 4 minute piece, right? Whether it's 10K,
The
half marathon.
5K, 10K, yeah.
Yeah, okay. 5K, 10K, half marathon. So to run a faster 5K, 10K, half marathon, the protocol is to take it down a notch and stay in that green zone for the bulk of your training, or actually, maybe a good time to talk about the 80-20 principle.
Yeah, the 80-20 principle is something I saw when I was studying athletes and I was trying to understand how they train. And I had come from the United States, which was like no pain, no gain, like you talked about. And then I was watching these highly successful Norwegian athletes and ultimately other athletes from other countries, and I was German rowers and so forth. And I was like, wow, they are not training hard every day. Sometimes their lactate is 1 millimolar, which is basically really low. But they're stretching it out. They're using duration. They're not just using intensity. I think that's where what we see. So the 5K runner, the 10K runner, a 5K is something like 20 minutes for a lot of people, right? It can be down in the 15, it can be 25, but it's in that range. So you might think, well, I should just go out every day and train for 30 minutes as hard as I can. But that's not, again, we go back to building the cake. If you want to build the cake, you need to use longer duration efforts. Because that signals adaptations really effectively once we get past 30 minutes and 45 minutes of duration and get into that, towards the end of the hour, into that second hour. Now we start turning on new, more adaptations. So it's not just intensity that achieves the adaptations, it's intensity times duration. And if you use both, you have a more powerful toolbox for improving your 5K, for improving your 10K, and so forth.
Okay.
So if you only run for 40 minutes to be good at the 10K, you will never get as good as you should get. You will never achieve your potential. I'll just put it that way.
That's well. I mean, it's hard to misconstrue what you're saying there, which is great. Um, I can hear people saying now, but what about VO2 max, right? Surely the best way to build a VO2 max is 4x4 method or 4 minutes intensely on, 4 minute rest.
Mm.
Let When we look at just specific VO2 max, which I think is becoming a measure that a lot of people focused on preventative
Yep.
health are
Yep.
focused on. What are the common misconceptions when it comes to specifically building a great VO2 max?
Okay. Well, here's the lowdown. First, that you don't just train hard to get a better VO2 max. Just getting out the door and train 4 days a week easy would improve your VO2 max if you haven't been doing anything. So there's a lot of crossover or a lot of overlap in terms of the adaptations across intensity zones. But yes, if you are regular training just at low intensity and you've got a base, and then you add a once a week or twice a week interval session, on average, VO2 max will bump up, some percentage. Not a lot, not as much as you might think, but it'll go up, and that's very useful. And so that works. But the point is if you don't do the low intensity work, you're not able to get the full effect of the interval training. You need both. That's what we see with the athletes. And in fact, with elite athletes, their VO2 max can go up just from increasing volume with no change in interval training. So that's the reality here, that there's several ways to the goal. The other thing is, if you take someone like Paula Radcliffe, who comes from the UK, who had the marathon record for many years, her VO2 max was the first physiological kind of indicator that peaked out. Her VO2 max did not improve after age 18. All right, I'm going to say that again. One of the all-time great marathoners, her VO2 max did not get better. It was about 70 milliliters per kilogram per minute. Very good, but it didn't change for 10 years. But her running speed got better and better and better. How? Well, because other adaptations occurred. Her speed at threshold, meaning the speed she could hold in that yellow zone, just kept getting better, kept getting faster. And that's what you need if you want to run a fast half marathon or marathon. Her efficiency, meaning her economy, how fast could she run for a given oxygen consumption, that got better. Okay. And these things happen with volume, with longer runs, with threshold sessions. They don't just happen with VO2 max workouts. So that is the common misconception. People think VO2 max is like the final icing on the cake. No, actually, it's not. It's one of the first things that peaks out if you train reasonably well.
Wow, I mean, a VO2 max of 70, though, I mean, it's pretty high, right?
Yeah, of course.
But so it's not the only metric that matters when it comes to sort of running fast and running well and building
Nope.
endurance. Right? Okay. What other metrics or whatever? Actually, I'll phrase it differently. Can you talk about the Norwegian method and lactate and where this has come from and why it's suddenly getting all the rage in the sort of endurance?
Yeah. It's I got to be honest, it's a little bit of a marketing campaign. So if we really dissect what is the Norwegian method, I would say, has been going on for 30, 40 years at least. And it is this 80-20-ish kind of distribution. It is using duration, appropriate use of high intensity, getting the, making the cake and eating the cake. All of that is the Norwegian method. And it has worked, and it has given a lot of gold medals in different endurance sports. However, on top of that, there's always innovation, and I think an interesting thing that has emerged at the very highest levels of performance in the triathlon and to a certain and also in middle distance running for a couple of Norwegians has been this idea of so-called double threshold sessions, where they are doing 2 workouts in a day, that's going to be a hard day. So this is a hard day in their overall distribution, but then they'll split up and do a threshold session in the morning and a threshold session in the afternoon. And so instead of one super hard long session, they'll break it up into two, and the sum of the two is more than a single session, if that makes sense. But the argument has been that they get a good stimulus for adaptation, and it's somewhat less stressful. They recover better. So this is an important idea, and an important thing that is going on is what we are always trying to do as athletes, even as age groupers or recreational. We should be thinking, I want to get the most signal for adaptation that I can at the most or the least stress. The goal is not to destroy yourself. The goal is to trigger adaptations and then recover so that you can live to fight again tomorrow, right? And that's what athletes are constantly trying to manage, is signal versus stress. Signal means turning on adaptations so that my VO2 max gets better, my threshold gets higher, mitochondria are built, and so forth. Stress means all of the cost of doing all that, the sympathetic stress, the effects on the immune system, the muscle damage, all of that. Training does cost, it does do damage. So we have to manage those two in a way that is, I hate to use the word, but in a way that is sustainable. Because that's really what good training looks like, is it is a sustainable long-term process that is both physically manageable but also psychologically enjoyable. That if all the joy goes away, then what we see is that the results also go away, even at the highest levels. I could even say I was just at a conference with some of the best athletes in the world and top coaches, and the theme of that session ended up being joy. That when we're talking world champions, but when the joy disappeared, if they achieved or came in a situation where performances were going down and it wasn't working, they said, I lost the joy in the training process. So take all your watches and your physiology and everything, but if there's no enjoyment in the process, you're not gonna get where you want to go.
There's a nice phrase which is applicable to just reading, right? Which goes, read what you love until you love to read. And it seems applicable here in the sense of the more consistent signal is better than the just really intense one. And actually just build the habit and enjoy it, and sort of earn the right to I guess do it for a long period of time, as opposed to just burn yourself out.
Well, it's the same thing with investing. The power of compound interest, and that's what consistency is for the body. It is interest compounding. When we're able to string together multiple sessions where we're staying healthy, we're staying motivated, we're able to get out the door, that just gives a lot of good results. And athletes, when you ask them on the podium, well, what's the secret to your success? They don't say, well, it was that epic workout I did on Wednesday 2 weeks ago. No, they say, you know what? I've had a 6-month period where I've stayed healthy, I've avoided injury, I've been able to do the work, and it gave good results. It's not magical. It's that simple, but it's also that hard.
Well, I think the consistency piece is the hard one, right? If you apply it to compound interest, you can either be on a negative log scale, a linear, or a non-linear one. And it sounds like if you want the non-linear returns from endurance, you got to be consistent, and let you say sustainability, that piece of show up consistently at a manageable intensity, so you don't get injured and burn out, and actually enjoy it. That seems to make a lot of sense. I mean, you always know it's a good podcast when during the conversation, I just want to run out and do exactly what whoever I'm talking to is suggesting. So, I want to go on a nice green zone, slow run, smell the roses. I want to build my endurance sensibly. I'm very guilty of just trying to be too quick. And
sure. Yeah. Well, it's easy. I am supposed to be like the preacher about this, and I still have to be careful because I can easily, we say, chase squirrels. So trust me, it's a lifelong struggle.
Yeah, well, fellow squirrel chaser here. With when it comes to, is there any benefit to actually, okay, we've done a lot of green zone training. What about like how to manage your training over a week? If you're trying to build, again, it's for the 5K, the 10K, the half marathon, you're trying to build good endurance. Would you, as 80% of the time you spend in the green zone, where would the other 20% of the time be? Would it be in the yellow or the red? And how would you manage that?
That's a really good question. It depends a little bit on several things. Whether you do, if you're a recreational athlete, you don't have particularly high base, you might start more with threshold sessions and try to build capacity there. And then as you approach, for example, that 5K, those threshold sessions are going to drift or move towards closer to those VO2 max interval type sessions. So you can kind of you intensify the 20% as you approach a competition or a goal, like the 10K, the 5K, whatever it might be. Now, if it's a marathon, you may say, well, actually, I'm almost going to flip it and I might do some VO2 max intervals. But then as I approach the marathon, I'm going to stretch the hard workouts and make them more marathon ish, if that makes sense, because then it's about sustaining a pretty darn high pace longer, right? So how you use the point is that those yellow zone sessions and those red sessions, they're both hard. They're just different kinds of hard. The yellow is hard as a function of duration. It grinds you down. You do an hour at threshold, you have to concentrate it because it's going to feel tougher and tougher as you go. The red zone, it's shorter and higher intensity, and it's also hard. So they're different flavors of hard, right?
Hmm.
Once you get into yellow and red, they're both hard. And so now we just decide, okay, what's the emphasis here? Is it duration where I'm trying to hold a 85, 87, 90% longer, or is it intensity where I'm really trying to be able to put the hammer down for a very short time? So that can depend on where you are in your season, which kind of race you're going to do. Are you a rower that's going to race for 6 minutes on the Thames, or are you doing a 5K that lasts 20 minutes, or are you doing a half marathon that lasts an hour and a half, right? Or an hour and 45 minutes, depends on your speed. So that's where the magic happens in a way, but you've got to always do the base.
Okay, right.
Okay.
So regardless of the demand of the race or the
Yeah. So
just
Paula Radcliffe or Inger Christensen's had the world record in when we look at how they trained, even during the season, they don't stop doing the green zone work. They don't just suddenly only train hard. That'll bury them. But what they'll do is the whole volume, all the total training will go down a bit, so they get more recovery. But that there's still a lot of green, and then races are maybe more of the yellow and red. It's a bigger proportion of the yellow and red is just actual competition. So competitions are also training. If you do a series of 5Ks during the summer or whatever, or during the summer fall, then those races themselves, you have to think of them as part of that red zone stuff. Does that
yeah,
make sense?
yes, it does. Yes, the intensity is sufficient enough to be, it's
Oh
like
yeah.
yeah, it's money in the bank in that zone in that area.
And it's eating the cake for sure. Races that's when you really see, I mean, we always see athletes will hit their highest heart rates, their highest blood lactates, their highest perceived exertions in races, you know, not training. Training is somewhat more controlled. Races, you bring the shovel and dig, you know.
When you mentioned heart rate, how do we, when it comes to the green, the yellow, and the red zone? I think if we just go through how we know we're in each of them, and then end up we start at green and then we go to red. So is the talk test a good place to start if you're in the green or?
Yeah, I mean, it's the green to yellow transition that I would argue is the most important to really try to get right. You kind of know when you're in the red zone. It's pretty obvious, So, but it's that green to yellow, and the most common error will be that green goes into yellow. That too many sessions that should be green are actually yellow, if that makes sense.
Mm.
And so that transition, one of the things I tell people is if you're in the green zone and you've got a decent base, you should be able to do at least an hour at whatever that intensity is you're at, and your heart rate just essentially stays flat. It doesn't drift up. You shouldn't feel like this is getting harder and harder and harder. You should almost feel like, if I needed to go another 30 minutes, I could do it. Okay. I'm fine. There's no intention to say I'm gonna take myself to my ragged limit here. I'm gonna keep going until I drop. That's not the goal. The goal is to just put money in the bank, right? Just put training in the bank, right? And that may be, for a cyclist, it may be a 4-hour ride. For a runner, it may be that long run on a Saturday or a Sunday that lasts 2 hours, right? And yes, it's effortful. It's purposeful, and the second hour definitely feels tougher than the first hour. But you're not going into the cellar. You don't want to be digging a hole for yourself. Okay? You want to be able to end the day, have a smile on your face, and say, "Where's the spaghetti?"
Mm.
Okay?
How do you know I say that? You're right. I guess you don't want any any of your autonomic nervous system to be stimulated during that. It's just going to be super easy. You can just carry about your day after.
Yeah, you made a good point there. I often talk about trying to stay under the sympathetic radar. You don't want to turn on that big, our inbuilt sympathetic nervous system response, which says fight or flight. I'm either running for my life or I'm standing my ground and I'm fighting for survival. I don't want to turn that system on every day because it's quite costly. That's the way we get burned out, is when we do that. When that sympathetic system drips on us every day. So I want green zone training to stay under that radar. I get a lot of adaptations, but I do it inexpensively. Does that make sense?
It does. It
I'm
does.
trying to be economical. I'm managing my effort. And then I say, okay, now tomorrow I'm going hard. Tomorrow I am going to turn on that sympathetic system. That's part of the job. That's part of the goal. So it's not like we never do it, but we do it under control. We know when, and we know why, and we know how we're going to do it.
I've realized that I've probably spent my whole entire life in doing the 80-20 framework, but the other way around.
Yeah, right.
And I completely ruined it.
Yeah, you're doing the 20-80 model. I get that. And the only reason you do the 20 is because when your body just forces you to do it,
Yeah. I can't go hard.
Yeah. You tried to go hard, but you couldn't, so that became the 20. I know. Trust me, you're not alone. Don't feel bad.
I'm kind of excited. I mean, I'm excited to take this and practice it for the next 6 months and see how I get on, though. I think if I haven't been getting it right and I changed tack, perhaps there's some hope after all. When it comes to finding,
Well, and I got to tell you, you are. I'm looking at you because we're filming, and I can see you, and you've got some muscles. You've been doing some strength training. I see it. You're a mesomorph, which that's even more in your disfavor when it comes to endurance, because you will tend to see every situation as an opportunity to use your strength, use your power, right? So that's how you solve exercise problems, is with just killing it, right? Because you probably have pretty good anaerobic capacity. You ran the 400. I did too. I know how that works. I have the fast twitch fibers. So people like us, we have to fight our inclinations to go to our strength, and because we never build that basic endurance capacity. Your only thing in your toolbox is a hammer.
you nailed it, absolutely. And it's big
Yeah.
ego thing, right? It's you get rewarded for it as like a younger athlete in your early 20s of intensity, right?
Yeah.
800 meters, 400 meters,
Yeah.
whatever it is, grit.
Sure.
And yeah, different game it seems. So it's yeah,
Because there's not too many 400 meters on the weekends these days. You know, I don't think they do a park 400 meter, you know.
yeah. You wouldn't have many people signing up as well. It's just the most horrible
No,
place in the world. I don't know why anyone does it. I mean, oh yeah, okay, stop
I
smiling.
did it. So I know, man, I've had the monkey jump on my back coming down the stretch. I know what that feels like.
How quick do you go?
I was like 51. I wasn't that bad, but I was only 16 at that time.
No,
So
that's very quick for 16.
I was just decent. But then I got injured. So I learned, you know, that I was kind of what they call a tweener. I had pretty decent VO2 max, 72 mLs per kg, but I had also, you know, that fast twitch mix. And so I was kind of like stuck in no man's land. I was never going to be really good as a 400 meter person or really good as a 10K runner or, you know, and that's how most of us are, you know, but we can have fun. We can still do things better and still enjoy training and achieve lots of improvement.
Yeah, for sure. And how fixed is that though? I mean, I put myself in a similar bracket where, used to do fours, used to do eights, but now I'm trying to build more endurance, right? I guess,
Yeah.
my question is, how genetic are those fast twitch versus slow twitch fibers, and how adaptable?
Yeah, I mean it's quite genetic. That's a significant part of it. Is most of us are kind of in the middle. But if you want to be a champion marathoner or a champion 400 meter runner, you need some unusual genetics. You need to be an oddball. Let's just put it that way. You can't be average and then pull that body to elite performance. Let's take it this way. What they said, we've done a lot of work on middle distance recently, and if you want to run a world class 800 meter, you've got to have at least 22-second 200 meter speed, right? Well,
Mm,
that eliminates 98% of the people before they even start training for the 800 because they just don't have the raw speed to be able to, because you have to be able to comfortably run at a speed that most people can't even do at max.
mm, yeah.
You've got to be, that's your 800 pace, is a pace that most people can't even get to
What
ever.
I mean, extrapolating that back, most people can't run an 11-second flat 100 meters,
That's right.
right? And then to do it twice back to back, good luck.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that has to be so because that's going to be 20, they're going to be just a couple seconds slower than that. They're going to be running the 24, 24.5
Mm,
so that has to feel easy for them, or at least at the first 200, first 400 should feel under control. And the only way that can be true is if they've got a big speed reserve. Right. So now we're getting into the weeds on that, but that says something about, yeah, you got to have some genetics. You've got to be one of the fastest kids on the playground as a kid, likely, or as a teenager, if you're going to have even a hope of running a fast 800
mm. It's interesting. I
or
mean,
really fast 800.
yeah. I mean, I was just trying to think. My best 100 time was 10:09, and that was when I
Yeah.
was 18, 19. I couldn't do two of them back to back. Nowhere near quick enough, right? But
Right.
crazy. I mean, I guess with
And
the
10.9 is good. 10.9 is, that's a good time, but then it's still another, there's another second.
a lot of work to
you
do.
know, yeah.
But I think it gives a real appreciation for, you got the Olympics coming up in Paris. I think it gives a real appreciation to how impressive these athletes are.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to just sort of be like, yeah, okay, all good, don't really have a context. But yeah, especially the endurance races, putting into perspective how quick these people are actually running, it's really impressive. Everything we're talking about when it comes to green, when it comes to, I guess, orange or yellow and red zones, is this applicable, and our wider conversation, is it applicable across genders?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So, yeah, that's a great question and an important point because unfortunately, a lot of the data we have is male centered because just historically we've done most of the research on males. We're getting better at doing, catching up with our work on female athletes, but we know definitely enough to be able to say that everything I've said to you, it's the same for the female athlete and the male athlete. The physiology there is the same. There can be some issues associated with the menstrual cycle, and there can be some issues. There's some differences in just size and heart size and things that explain why, even though Paula Radcliffe was an amazing marathoner, she was still 10 minutes slower than the best male. There are some reasons for that. It's not because she didn't train smart or correctly or hard. It's just because of some differences between, on average, the top males and the top females, heart size and so forth. So that part, but getting the training process, the same.
Okay, understood. The this is just anecdotal, but I've noticed that men, on average, get better times than females in 100 meters, 200 meters, 400 meters, 800 meters, perhaps half marathons. When it comes to ultra endurance, it seems to be a bit more level playing field.
Yeah. Yeah.
How come? Why is that?
Yeah, there's lots of discussion about that, just slowly, but sure, because obviously, like VO2 max becomes less and less of a limiting factor. And other issues become bigger factors, just like resilience, the body's ability to handle stress and load. Being lighter over many hours may actually have some advantage. There's less pounding, less ballistic stress on the body if you have a lighter body, perhaps. So there may be some metabolic issues involved, that maybe fat utilization may be better in the female athletes. So these things come more to their fruition the longer the event becomes. And now we're talking really long, hours and hours and hours. And so you do get to a point where the differences become much smaller in these ultra events, which is interesting. It's fascinating. And we also have to remember that it'll be interesting to see when there's enough money in ultra running to draw in the current best marathoners in the world. If you get the best marathoners in the world today, women and men, to do ultras because the money's there, will they change the game, or will we find out, no, ultra is its own beast, and the best marathoners don't necessarily become the best ultra runners? We don't really know that yet because it hasn't really happened, I would argue. So that's still part of the, if you take the best Kenyan marathoners, the best Ethiopian marathoners, and they had the motivation to do, 100K, would they also be best there within a couple of years? I just don't know.
I mean, I guess an ultra 100K makes a marathon look middle distance, right? It's so it really draws it out, and I guess there's a very different type of athlete and sizes.
There's different factors that play into just how you handle food, the injuries, all that stuff. It becomes different.
I feel like the bottleneck for me ever trying to do an ultra is actually my my joints and my body and my sort of mobility and things like this. It seems like the buy-in for sound endurance is just that regular signal we spoke about, right? It's like the compound interest equivalent. A bottleneck for some people could be, certain injuries, not being able to handle that training load from a muscular and joint perspective. How can you go about ensuring you've got, I guess, a adequate framework and body and joints to be able to handle that endurance?
Right. Well, there's several aspects to that. I mean, if you're a 2-meter tall guy, you weigh 100 kilos, then part of me wants to say, you know what, try rowing. Play to your strengths, because some of us are physically, it might be that we're not all built for running. Let's just say that running imposes some very specific demands on the body, and being heavier, being bigger is just, on average, is not an advantage. It tends to make running more injurious, more injury promoting. And so you got two choices. One, if you're really struggling, you're saying, I'm constantly getting hurt running and I'm a big frame person, and that, you got two choices. One is you say, well, cycling or a sport that has less of that ballistic loading might be my answer. That I need to put my body in a little bit different context where there's less weight bearing. And I still get all the cardiovascular challenge. I still get the health benefits. I still get the competition joy in that. That's one way. The other way is to say, you know what, I'm going to have to cut down my running volume, but I'm going to replace that volume with cycling or with stair step or with some more non-ballistic types of loading. Probably not swimming because you wouldn't get enough crossover effect, but cycling appears to give a reasonable crossover effect to running based on what we see with triathlon, where we can see some quite good 10K runs at the end of a triathlon based on mileage that is not particularly high. And then we've seen, like, we've had a couple of good athletes in Norway that have had to do that, runners at world-class level that have had to reduce their running volume quite a bit and replace it with some skiing, with some step and that. And they've been able to run really fast. In fact, fastest ever by getting that balance right. So those are your two options. Is for me, that's what I chose. I said cycling works better for me. I get hurt if I start running a lot. And I enjoy cycling. I also have done rowing. But others who are pretty good runners, but they're just getting hurt regularly, that's what I would consider is doing, shifting out some of the run volume and replacing it with a less ballistic load.
Okay, so
ballistic, you know what I mean by that? It's just
yes,
pounding.
the impact, right, on feet kind of.
Yeah.
So
Because you don't get that in cycling or swimming or skiing or rowing. You don't get that ballistic pounding.
yeah, I think that's what I need to do. It's you take the load out and you still get the endurance stimulus,
Yep.
right? So you're
Yep.
training that system, but less impact. Okay, that's a great answer. Just jumping back quickly, I really want to ask this question. So, how much of your VO2 max potential, and I keep harping back on it purely because, from a preventative health point of view, the sound VO2 max is upstream of all sorts of disease prevention. How much of your your VO2 max is genetically determined, and how much is in our control?
No, I would be hesitant to say because I don't have an exact number, but what we've seen is that in some of the big studies, there's like one that I remember well was the Heritage study where they brought in husband, wife, and child into the study. So there was a genetic component. They were both in the same household, and they trained exactly the same for 6 months, as I recall, and they measured them very carefully. And this was a multi-center trial, and the variation in the delta, the change in VO2 max was just enormous, even though the training protocol was exactly the same and it was monitored very carefully and so forth. And it was, there were tests and adjustments and everything. So it was done about as well as you can do it. And yet the change in VO2 max across these hundreds of people, the distribution was huge. The variation was huge.
Okay.
From at the extreme, almost no change, to way out there, 35-40% improvement, but the average was more like 15%. So you get what's called a normal distribution, if you've seen these curves. And so there are people out on the tails at extreme that respond either very, very poorly or amazingly well. And then most of us are somewhere in the middle.
Right. Okay. Interesting. When it comes to, I mean, you spent 30 years studying humans at their 30 years. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, that's right.
Right. I mean,
You can see it on my face.
not a lot, not at all. That's a long time to be looking at humans through this pretty unique lens. What surprised you most about humans in general from what you've studied?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. What surprised me most? I guess it was a big surprise to me to move to Norway and discover that no pain, no gain was not actually the pathway to excellence. It's part of course, there's pain. to get the gain. But it's not, that's not the way it works. It has to be sustainable. There's an amazing amount of joy. When I talk to, some of the best athletes in the world, and I've been lucky to be able to speak to gold medal winners in multiple sports, and they talk about the joy of it all, the process, the being out in nature, on the water and rowing, or cycling together in the peloton, and then stopping for a cappuccino in the Italian Alps or whatever. That's what they talk about, and that's part of it. So they're phenomenal athletes, and they have incredible strength in their head. Don't get me wrong, but when you get them talking, they talk about joy and about laughter and about process, and so I think that's really been the nice surprise.
Love that. Love that. Well, I think it's a great answer to end on. It should be fun. It shouldn't just be a chore every single day, right? It's building endurance is something that should be enjoyable. And I guess this whole conversation has changed my whole perspective on it, which is really, really great. So thank you so much for coming on. Really
Well,
enjoyed
thank you.
with you. And yeah, where can we find you? Where can people keep up with your work and what you're up to?
Yeah, well, I'm on the internet. If you just write in my name, it's pretty easy to find a bunch of videos and YouTube stuff. But I'm also on Twitter, or X. That's where I kind of do the scientific exchange, and I've got 30,000 followers or whatever. And so it's a nice focus group for discussing training. Lots of coaches, athletes, scientists, and so that's another outlet. And then the hardcore geeks that want to read the stuff, they can find me on what's called Google Scholar, and that points them in the direction of all the papers and stuff.
Wonderful. I would add an in between if you want a bit more depth than X and you want slightly more digestible than Google Scholar or PubMed. You've got a wonderful YouTube channel and lots of great talks, lots of great videos on there, which I really enjoyed going through. I've actually subscribed and will be a regular follower along. So yeah, do check out Stephen's YouTube channel. I think it's just at Stephen Seiler. I think Stephen Seiler.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. Yeah, my name is just enough unusual that I can actually use just my name.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, look, thanks so much again. So enjoyable. I'm going to go out for a very long, slow run and just very chilled pace. And
Awesome.
cheers. Thank you so much.
All right, take care. Bye bye.